So I'm out here walking in this mangrove tunnel, surrounded by wildlife out here by the beach. I hope the lighting works out because it's kind of cool out here. So, you know, people call and they call with some pretty good questions, but the questions that still catch me off guard are, hey, do you have alligators in Port St. Lucie? Are there snakes? Do pigs chase you around? Do the smaller lizards bite? So I get all these questions about wildlife. So in this video, I'm going to try and answer all the wildlife questions that I've been asked over the years. So stick around. Here we go. Hey, I'm Steve Kimos, a realtor specializing in new construction here in beautiful and kind of wild Port St. Lucie, Florida. So let me start by saying the Treasure Coast has some of the coolest wildlife. It's one of the things that my wife loves so much about this area. There are unique birds such as spoonbills, sandhill cranes, multiple species of herons and egrets and manatees and such. So as an example, here's a random situation where I was walking around the lake at Tradition Square and I saw 3 brown-bellied whistle ducks, 2 sandhill cranes, and a family of otters all in the same shot, just walking around minding their own business. I mean, the wildlife down here is really cool and kind of unique. Now, where I come from in the suburbs of Maryland, we have bobcats, coyotes, rattlesnakes, black widow spiders. Wherever you live, there's wildlife, and some of that wildlife can be dangerous to humans. Well, Florida and Port St. Lucie in general are no different than that. There are bobcats and there are some coyotes, but no more than the mid-Atlantic region. But I can assure you, Florida is definitely not Australia where freaking everything wants to kill you. It's a little windy out here because it is the beach, but there are some things you need to know about the wildlife, and the first of which are sharks. Florida has 1,350 miles of coastline, not including the Keys. So shark encounters are higher, say, than in Maryland when there's only 31 miles of ocean coastline. So in 2024, there were 14 shark attacks in Florida, resulting in 0 deaths. Leading the way was Smyrna Beach with about 7 attacks per year. Now, for some reason, Smyrna Beach must have some convergence of currents or abundance of food or some kind of unexplained series of conditions that causes it to be the shark capital of the world. Now, by the way, New Smyrna Beach is 134 miles away from Hutchinson Island in Port St. Lucie, so just saying. So regardless, shark attacks are extremely rare in Florida. Your chances of being attacked by a shark are about 1 in roughly 4 million. Now, sticking with the ocean, which is incredibly blue today, there are 2 more types of marine life that I get asked about. One is the man-o-war, and the other is the box jellyfish. Now, man-o-wars are very interesting because they have this bright blue purpley color, but they're not a single organism. They're a bunch of organisms acting as one. I think that's kind of interesting. They're not deadly, but their sting is supposedly incredibly painful. If you see one, of course, you just stay away. Now, as far as box jellyfish go, they're found on the west coast of Florida in the Gulf. They're also not deadly like their Pacific versions of the species, but they supposedly have a sting just as powerful and as bad as the man-o-war. Now, of course, many times a year you can come out here and you see the turtles laying their eggs and the hatchlings, and they'll mark off certain spots that are turtle habitats that you can't step on, you got to watch out for. Certain times of year, thousands of people come out to see the turtles hatch and run into the water. It's a really cool sight. So the next most asked question I get is, are there alligators and will they kill you? Now, yes, there are alligators everywhere in the state of Florida. They're also in Georgia and the Carolinas, along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana. But overall, they're way more scared of you than you are of them. In 2024, there were 11 bites with 0 deaths. Of the bites, 9 were considered significant and required stitches, and the other 2 were minor. Now, out in tradition, if there's a gator over a few feet, you can call and have them removed. Here's a picture of one that just got removed from the pond in my neighborhood. Now, there was an incident in 2023, just a mile or so from my house, where an elderly woman was walking her dog down by the shoreline of a pond when the gator went for her dog but grabbed her instead. The alligator dragged her into the water where unfortunately she drowned. People that die in alligator attacks, they usually aren't killed by the bite. Instead, they're drowned once they're dragged into the water. So you do need to be aware of starting startling an alligator, you know, when you're out there walking, but I promise you won't be eaten by an alligator. The chances of being killed by an alligator attack are roughly the same as a shark, about 1 in 4 million. So the next question I get is about snakes. Now, I actually saw more garter snakes, water snakes, and black snakes where I lived in the countryside of Maryland. But snakes are about as common in tradition in Port St. Lucie. Now, all these snakes are beneficial for the environment, but a couple of these snakes are dangerous to humans and animals. The first that you need to look out for is the eastern diamondback and the pygmy rattlesnakes. They hide in tall grass and pine straw and mangrove like you see behind me here. Occasionally you'll hear about one in a neighborhood, but these snakes have been forced further out into the west or deep into preserves. Now, the second snake that is venomous is the coral snake, and they're much more prevalent in south of Port St. Lucie. But Port St. Lucie's in the snake's territory. Now, the coral snakes are very venomous, but despite that, you don't hear about bites because coral snakes don't really strike. They more like bite. So most of the recorded bites happen to people who are handling the snakes instead of just leaving them alone like they should be in the first place. So by the way, the coral snake is often confused with the king snake, which has evolved over the centuries to look like a coral snake in order to be left alone. It's pretty smart evolution. And there's a rhyme that I've heard different versions of that helps you tell the two snakes apart, and it goes something like this. If red touches yellow, we'll kill a fellow. Red touches black, the venom is lack. Now you can see the difference here in the picture I'm showing on screen between the two, but you can see how they're kind of similar. So another snake that's even more rare to hear bites are the cottonmouth water snakes, which are all up and down the East Coast. There are very few of those recorded in the state of Florida. But in Florida in 2024, there were 322 venomous snake bites with exactly 0 fatalities. So death from snake bites is even rarer than alligator and shark attacks. Now, one animal that tends to leave you alone, but they're out there, especially the further west you get, are pigs and boars. They get very protective when they have little babies around, but they're really cute, but they just run away from you, and they're being forced further and further out west. So you have to kind of keep an eye out because they will dig up your yard and root through your yard. So occasionally you can call and have wildlife trappers come remove the wild pigs. So finally, let's talk about bugs and scorpions. As far as bugs goes, it's just like any other parts of the United States. There are black widows, brown recluse spiders. And Florida is no more dangerous than these other places. They don't have 15 different more species of spiders that'll kill you. You're more likely to be annoyed by mosquitoes than anything else. So one thing is for certain, during the wet season, you got to invest in some good mosquito repellent. I also always suggest spending the $1,800 to $2,500 to screen in your lanai so you can enjoy the outside without thinking about mosquitoes. Or you can cage in the whole of your backyard for $15,000 to $20,000, but it's nice to be able to use that space without being bothered by bugs. Now in the dry season, it's not much of a problem, but in the wet season, it can be. So that's something you need to look into. Of course, let's not forget about the famous Florida no-see-ums. Now these are tiny arthropods where you don't feel them, you're biting you don't feel yourself getting bit. It's creepy. But when you get home from an outside event, you have 10 bites where you can't figure out where the heck they came from. No-see-ums are really strange. Now, some people, especially if you're coming from California or Texas or other parts of the Southwest, ask me about scorpions. Scorpions are not prevalent in Florida, but there are 2 species that live in the area. They live in preserves and heavily wooded sections like you see here. But both are species that would tend to leave you alone. The Florida bark scorpion and the striped scorpion, they don't have extremely potent stings and they're not considered really dangerous. Now, one legitimate concern people have are about cane toads. Cane toads are also known as bufo toads. Now, these large, fat terrestrial toads were brought here from South America to aid the agriculture industry with controlling pests. And of course, like anything humans mess with, they got out of control, and now cane toads are an invasive species problem. The real problem with cane toads is they secrete a liquid that can actually kill your dog or cat. So you have to be diligent when walking your dog, like I am now. You have to make sure your dog isn't going to lick or bite a cane toad. If you think your dog has had contact with a cane toad, take the hose and immediately rinse out their mouth, scrub their tongue and their gums thoroughly, and your dog should be okay. But I recommend taking your dog to the vet to be totally sure your dog's out of danger. And sometimes these cane toads, they can be confused with the native toads here. They look a lot alike, but they're bigger and they have kind of a shield between their their eyes, like you can see in the picture here. So thanks for joining me on my walk through this mangrove forest tunnel that goes for a mile from Bob Graham Beach, kind of further down towards Stewart for about a mile. But there you have it. It's a cursory look at the wildlife around Tradition in Port St. Lucie, especially the wildlife that might be dangerous if you're too careless. Now again, I know it's cliche, but you're more likely to be struck by lightning and you're 5 times more likely to die in a car accident than you are to die from sharks, alligators, snakes, and scorpions than anything else. I mean, overall, Port St. Lucie isn't statistically any more dangerous than anywhere else in the United States. So if you want to call me and talk about the wildlife, or you want to talk about anything real estate related, be sure to call me. My information's on the screen here and in the description below. And I hope you found this information interesting. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye.